And I guess we'll introduce each other more or less, or I will introduce myself and you can introduce yourself for those two or three people who don't know who you are.
I
Um,
will. I won't introduce myself.
okay.
You can introduce me because I'm your guest.
Okay. This is Sal, and we have today Neale Walsch as our guest. And I know him from the Conversations with God material. That's, to be honest, pretty much all that my only contact really is from the Conversations with God books. Um, I think you came out with a children's book about a little soul and a sun or something like that. Was that you or that came out with that book? I'm not sure. Anyway, there may have been a couple other books that I've seen but haven't really spent much time with. Um, Really, I don't know what else to say except that conversations with God is probably the most important, valuable thing we can do as human beings. And so I'm looking forward to going deep, taking a deep dive with with you on the subject of God consciousness, how to live in this world and be in God consciousness. That's a huge topic. So I'm looking forward to diving in with you on that topic. And so I won't say much more about myself. I've been on a path for about 50 years. I've written 7 books, and you can find out more about me on my website, which is salrakelly.com. I do pronounce the last name Rakelly. And why don't I go ahead and ask you a very direct question, and that would be, what do you see as the most important thing you can do right now to help us all wake up to who we really are?
Send people God's most important message. That would be the most important thing that I could do, would be to share with people what I consider to be the most important message that I was given in my conversation with God. And that message, Sal, was really very simple. In the dialogue, which covers actually 9 dialogue books, over 3,000 pages of back and forth, questions and answers. And in that 9 book, 3,000 page dialogue, I was told, Neale, your life is not about you. It's about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. But when you step into the living of that, then you will understand at a cosmic level, at a universal level, that your life really is about you for an elegant reason. There's nobody else in the room. We are all one. There is only one of us, and all things are one thing. So when you understand that we are all one, then you will realize that what you do for another, you do for yourself. And conversely, what you fail to do for another, you fail to do for yourself. Now, Sal, I recall that somebody said something very close to that, probably 10 or 15 years ago, or maybe it was 20 years ago, or no, wait, it was 2,000 years ago.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, he said, do unto others as you would have it done unto you. What
Mm.
was not explained by those who remembered what he said was, it's because what you do unto others is being done unto you, because
Mm.
there's only one of us. And that was the missing piece, I think, that closes the circle, or at least did so for me in my conversations with God. So to answer your question directly, Sal, the most important thing that I could do, or that all of us could do really, is to receive that incredible message. Your life is not about you. It's about
Mm.
everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. When I began to step into the living of those words, Sal, everything in my life changed
Hmm.
for the better.
The question comes up, which is related directly to the previous question, and that is that there are a lot of listeners who have an intellect that can understand everything we're saying. And they say, that sounds really wonderful. We're all one, and it feels really good, but I want to have a more direct experience of it. And I suppose meditation is part of the answer to that, but maybe you could give some insight as to how to move beyond the intellect into the actual experience of what we're talking about. I know this is a difficult question, but simple but difficult. Does that make sense?
Well, it doesn't feel difficult to me. Uh, the way to experience our oneness with others, the way for me to experience that we are all one, is to simply set my mind aside when I'm encountering another person. You know, I should say that many people have said to me, "Oh, why I know, Neale, you think you really had a talk with God. I mean, what are you, out of your mind?" And I have to say, actually, yes, I am out of
Out
my
of your
mind,
mind.
literally, and into my soul. So when I set my mind aside and step away from all of my thoughts about another person, when I meet another person or see another person again, my neighbor next door, or the person who lives across the street, or the person who is sitting across the room from me, when I'm encountering another human being, I do my best to step into what it feels like to be with them and what energetic they are projecting toward me. And then I see if there's any part of me that has ever experienced the same energetic. And so far, I have not met a human being in the past 30 years whose energetic projection I could not remember feeling at least once, if not more than once, in my own life. In other words, to put this simply, Sal, I see myself across the room because I feel the same things they're feeling, or can at least remember when I have felt the same things that I sense that they are feeling now. And so I guess that's what I have done in my own life to feel the oneness and just allow myself to step into what it feels like to be with another person. And
Mhm.
I don't listen so much to their words. I don't ignore what they're saying, of course, but I don't listen so much to their words as I listen to the energy that my body feels as they're sharing whatever they're sharing with me.
Yes, that sounds wonderful. What came up was you were describing that is people that I perceive as being relatively asleep to who they are. Um, and I can recall, I think we all can recall times in our lives before we had an awakening, when we had this sense of separation. And I think of the world stage, the politicians, the priests, the doctors, the lawyers, the educators, all of this. And I think about how I used to be that way many years ago. One moment, please. I apologize for the interruption here. We're here in Mexico, and the vendors come and start yelling through the door to sell stuff. So I apologize for the interruption. But getting back to remembering prior to whatever level of awakening we've experienced at this point in our process. And it becomes easier to be compassionate and loving towards, let's say, tyrants, the petty tyrants of this world, the people who want to impose their will on other people or force others to believe as they believe. All of this, it becomes easier to love them and be compassionate with them when I remember back to those times when I was like that. And so that's kind of what came up for me as you were sharing that, because we don't have our head in the sand pretending that the whole world is enlightened. We know that about 3/4 of humanity doesn't even have a clue. When you say conversations with God, they think, well, only Jesus can have a conversation with God, and so
Well,
for whatever that's worth.
Or Moses, or Buddha,
Moses,
or Krishna,
or
or
Krishna.
Muhammad, or
Yes.
or Mother Mary, or Catherine of Genoa, or Mother
Right.
Teresa, or Hildegard of Bingen, or Elizabeth of Aragon, or Julian of Norwich, or H.P. Blavatsky, or dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of other people who have shared what they have understood God to be telling them, speaking directly to them and through them. And we don't, I'm going to say in response to what I just heard you say, Sal, but I think that the majority of human beings do believe that God does talk directly to human beings. I mean, when you say, do you think God spoke to Moses and gave Moses the Ten Commandments? Most people would say yes. Yeah, that's how. So, so I guess he does talk to human beings, not just to Jesus. Do you think that Buddha, the man that they called the Buddha, was enlightened through his direct connection with some larger place of wisdom and clarity? Most people would say, yeah, I think so. Oh, I see. So you are clear that God does talk directly to human beings. Do you think that God spoke directly to Muhammad, bless his holy name? Oh, of course he did. Oh, I see. So you do believe that God talks to human beings. It's not a question of whether you think God speaks directly to human beings. It's a question of whether you think God would speak directly to a particular human being. Now, even in modern times, I'm bringing up names from hundreds of thousands of years ago, but there are billions of people on the planet who believe that God speaks to the Pope, that the Pope has a direct mind, or the chief ulama, or the head rabbi, or the Archbishop of Canterbury, or somebody, people with certain credentials, people with certain qualifications. But would God speak directly to the first baseman for the New York Yankees? I don't think so. And would God speak directly to a guy in Southern Oregon in the United States, and then who actually wrote about it in a text called Conversations with God? And most people would say probably not. But in fact, and the reason that they would say that God didn't talk directly to me or to ordinary people is because, we're not worthy. We haven't really earned the right to be spoken to directly by God through our own holiness. But what's interesting about that, Sal? God speaks most often to people who need to hear from him, not to people who have already made it to mastery, people who have already become spiritual masters. God speaks to them as well, but God speaks most of all, and most importantly, and most urgently, and most immediately to people who need to hear from her. That's why she picks out people like me. So I'm very clear that God speaks to all of us, all the time. Now, here's what's interesting.
Common sense, I think, kicks in here, because if God can create the heavens and the earth, certainly God can speak to a human being. I mean, you just use basic.
Well, I don't think that anyone ever questioned God's ability. I think that they question God's intention to speak to average, ordinary people. So it was not a question of people saying, well, he's not able to do that. Nobody seriously thought that. Of course, like you said, common sense obviously tells us that God is able to do anything. But will God speak to some guy in Southern Oregon in the United States. Why would she do that? So we get to a place where we come to clarity that, oh, I see, God is speaking to all of us all the time. We're simply calling it something else. Women's intuition, an epiphany, a sudden insight, an incredible level of awareness that just came over us. We use whatever words we can use rather than call it what it is, a conversation with God.
Right.
Because we don't want to be ridiculed or rejected or, made fun of or even made wrong. I'm sure you're aware, Sal, that there are some religions that say if you claim to have been spoken directly to by God, you're a blasphemer.
Exactly.
You're a
Absolutely.
heretic.
We could have been in some times in the past just for claiming something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When God speaks to me directly, there is a content.
Well, now God doesn't speak to you directly. God doesn't speak to podcasts and talk show hosts. Let's get clear about that. Maybe God could speak to somebody like me because I'm worthy of it. But God certainly
okay. All right.
wouldn't speak to somebody like you. My God, Sal, come on.
But the message is always the same, and again, God is constancy. There's eternal love involved. But the message is always some form of "don't worry, be happy," like the song says. I've got it all handled. Just let me handle it. I've got it handled. Those are the kind of messages that I get directly, and it's done in a not the denial kind of way, like, oh, I'm just going to ignore all the problems in the world and pretend everything's fine. Not that kind of denial, but a genuine, everything is handled. Everything is in perfect divine order. And that's been my direct experience, if I want to call it a direct experience, that everything is truly in divine order. And to the extent that we don't believe that, we're going to experience what appears to be disorder and chaos. But to the extent that we really get that everything is in divine order, the universe rearranges itself, accommodates itself to our level of perception. So when we are at this level of God consciousness, we look out and we see the perfection, even in war, which is a hard one. We see the perfection even on the battlefield. Again, this is not easy to understand intellectually, but maybe you have a few comments on that.
Well, I'm wondering where, if God has got everything in order, then there must be some kind of plan. There must be some kind of, and if there is some kind of a plan that God is following, so to speak, in order to put things in order, then where does free will come in? Because either we live in a universe of predestination, where everything is already in order and things are happening perfectly according to that order, or we live in a universe that does not include predestination, but that is a universe of people expressing and experiencing free will. So, I've been asked a dozen times, Sal, at least a dozen times, Neale, was it predestined for you to write that book, Conversations with God? Was it in fact part of the plan that, and that your book would become, not bragging, just saying, an international bestseller and have been read by millions and millions of people? Is that, part of God's plan? And if it is part of God's plan, if your life was predestined in that way, where does your free will come in? So that's the question that I would place before the world. You need to decide whether or not we live in a predestined experience or an experience that is being created by the free will of 8.5 billion individuals.
I would say it's both. And I'll let me explain, because this is
Yeah,
probably
you better explain, because that makes no sense whatsoever.
This is one of the most difficult questions there is. I do an all-day workshop on this one question, and I'm not sure we get too far deep into it even in one day. But the Eastern philosophy, Advaita Vedanta philosophy, basically would say everything is predestined, but they say there is one aspect of free will, and that is you can accept or reject God's will or God's plan or God's perfection. You can accept or reject it. You can live in a world where you believe you're separate from God and that God doesn't care about you. God's too busy creating new galaxies to worry about a little man or woman living somewhere on Earth. So you could say that, but we seem to have what I call a multidimensional reality. And there's a dimension of free will, and then there's a dimension of predestiny, which is actually more all-encompassing than the dimension of free will. So you can go into the dimension of free will where your thoughts create your reality day by day, or you can reside in the dimension of predestiny where you basically merged your individual will with God's will and become one with God. So you could say it another way, and I think A Course in Miracles and other texts go into this direction with it, that it's a dream that you have a will that's separate from God's, that you're dreaming of a separate existence apart from God, and that you're resting in God's loving arms, and you're asleep and having a nightmare while you rest in God's loving arms. That would be another way to say that. The scientific way would be that you have nested dimensions, one within another, like sets and subsets.
I think it's a false narrative, however, because I don't think it's a comparison that we either have a separate will or, and if we have a separate will, then we must have a separate existence. I heard you say that, and as soon as you said it, I took a note. I thought, wait a minute. One could have free will without having a separate existence. One can be, in fact, united with and not separate from God and still have free will. So, having a separate will does not mean we have a separate existence. And in fact, quite the contrary. Because we are one with God, God has created each of us in her own image. He has decided that we are each created in the image and likeness of the divine, giving each of us the same free will that God has, proportionate to our size and proportionate to who we are. A grain of sand is not the entire beach. It's one single grain of sand on the beach, but it consists of the exact same thing that the beach is made of. So, or as God said to me, Neale, have you ever been on an ocean liner? I said, well, of course I have. God said, okay. Have you ever seen a wave on the ocean? I said, yes, I've seen a wave. God said, you are a wave on the ocean of divinity, not separate from the divine, and a rising of the ocean of divinity. You are an arising and an individuated expression, but never completely separate or other than that from which you are arising. And when your individual expression is complete, like a wave on the ocean, you recede back into the ocean itself, receding back into the ocean of God. So that was a metaphor that I was given in conversations with God that helped me understand my relationship to the divine and helped me know that while I'm never separate from the divine, I can nevertheless have a separate will from the divine.
Yeah, I think in a roundabout way, we're saying the same thing. When I do the sets and subsets, the dimension of free will is contained within the dimension of predestiny. So all of God is contained in that dimension of free will. But within that dimension of free will, there is this appearance that our will is separate from God's. There is this illusion that our will is separate from God's. And you could say, well, we're splitting hairs here. You could say that, but
No, what I would say is what God said to me, Neale, your will for you is my will for you.
mhm,
I
yeah,
want for you,
that's a good
I
way to
want
say
for
it.
you what you want for you. It's really quite simple. You
Mhm,
couldn't violate my will if you wanted to, because I want for you what you want for you.
mhm. Yeah, let's meditate on that for just a few seconds here
Okay.
because
Okay, meditation over.
okay. So I suppose I should be asking some additional questions, but this one is big enough to take up as much time as we have.
I'm not sure you
Um,
should be asking additional questions. You feel like, hello? Yeah, he says he thinks he should be asking additional questions. No, okay, thanks, God. Okay, bye. I have a direct line, and she said
yeah,
you don't need to ask any additional questions if you don't want to.
yeah, and I guess if you are truly awake to the presence of God within each of us, then there really are no questions. There's simply direct experience. Um, but I suspect, for the benefit of those who are crazy enough to listen to us, that perhaps we should address what might be lingering questions in the audience. And I guess the practical day by day life of people. You get up, you maybe clean your body, and you put clothing on it, and you do something for the day, whether it's work or play or combination or whatever. For the practical day to day experience, how does this relate to that? I guess would be the question. It's like, how can we take this experience we're sharing and apply it to everyday life on earth?
I think the way I have done it, again, at God's direction, if you please, from my conversation with God, the way I have done it is to come to clarity. This is a several step process. Step number one, come to clarity about who I really am and why I'm here. There are really, four fundamental questions of life, it seems to me, Sal. Number one, who am I? Number two, where am I? Question number three, why am I where I am? Why am I here? And then question number four, what do I intend to do about that? And I've asked myself those four questions at God's suggestion. And the four questions have been answered by me in the following way. Question number one, who am I? I'm not this. I'm not my body. And I'm not this. I'm not my mind. My body and my mind are simply tools, pieces of equipment being used by who I really am. And who I am is a spiritual entity, having a body and having a mind. But these are simply, as I said, pieces of equipment. Who I am is a spiritual entity. Okay, fair enough. Question number two, where am I? My answer is, I'm in the realm of the physical, as opposed to the realm of the spiritual. Question number three, why am I where I am? I am in the realm of the physical because in this realm there is a contextual field. That is, that which is other than who I am exists. Because in the absence of that which I am not, that which I am is not. And when I make that statement in front of an audience, I get puzzled looks on the faces of people. Neale, will you say that again? I said, sure. I said, in the absence of what I am not, what I am is not. They still don't quite understand what I'm trying to say. And I say, okay, let's put it this, let's use a metaphor. I'm not really claiming to be this, but as a metaphor. Let's claim that I am the light. Metaphorically speaking, I am the light. Now, in the absence of what I am not, that is, in the absence of darkness, which is what light is not, in the absence of what I am not, what I am is not. That is, I can't experience myself as the light in the absence of the darkness. Therefore, said God to me, raise not your fist to heaven and curse the darkness not, but be a light unto the darkness. that you might know who you really are, and that all those whose lives you touch might know who they really are as well. Which is why some guy said 15 or 20 years ago, or well, maybe more, 40 or 50 years ago, I guess it was 2,000 years ago, when he said, judge not and neither condemn.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's my answer to now the question number 4. Who am I? A soul, a spiritual entity. Where am I in the realm of the physical? Why am I where I am? Because here there's a contextual field that allows me to do what I came here to do, which is to experience and express my true identity. Question number 4, what do you intend to do about that? My answer to that question is watch me.
And the words watch me are deep. It's not just watch my words or understand my words. It's tune into my beingness.
Yes. And I'm sad to say, frankly, that people who have watched me have noticed that I am not the world's best representative of the words that have come through me. But that's my journey.
Mm-hmm.
That's the pathway that I'm taking, and I hope that when I pass on to the next realm and return to the realm of the spiritual, that they'll put on my gravestone 4 words. He tried his best.
Mm. Beautiful.
I'm not going to succeed. I'm not going to leave here being judged to have been one of the walking masters. But I hope people will say, you know what, he tried his best.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I've done better in the past 30 years, way better, frankly, than I did in the first 40 years
Right.
of my life. So
I think that judgment is the opposite of unconditional love. And I think that what I can do to do my best is remove all judgment and replace it with unconditional love
for
and
yourself.
for myself. And that will, of course, affect the world, because if I'm putting out unconditional love to the world instead of judgment, then I am transforming the world, just as you're transforming the world by putting out unconditional love. We all are when we put out unconditional love. The world does transform.
Yes, and I wish I could do that on a consistent basis all the time. But I
Mm-hmm.
find myself failing in that effort now and again. I'll run into a person or encounter a situation involving other people, and frankly, I don't experience unconditional love.
I
And
catch myself. I see an arrogant politician, for example, that thinks he knows what's best for all of us based on his own belief systems. And
oh,
at
you're
the
talking about
moment,
Jimmy Carter, yeah.
well, you fill in the blank. There's a lot of names that can go in the blank. But then I catch myself and say, okay, there's a child of God who's apparently not aware that he's a child of God, and who's apparently not
Or
aware
that
that
she
God is
is,
everything.
or that she is, because some countries actually have women as presidents. It's hard to believe. I know it's incredible, but
Like Mexico, the one I'm living
she,
in.
oh gosh, I didn't know that. I can't imagine that I would just bring that up out of the clear blue. My goodness gracious me.
Not only that, she's Jewish.
That explains everything.
Yeah, so I catch myself when I start to go into judgment, and then it's like, okay, it's like you're walking along a path, you fall down. What do? Sit there and lament the fact that you fell down, or do you pick yourself up, brush yourself off, and get back on the path? And unfortunately, some people sit there and lament the fact that they fell. So
Yes. And religion has taught us to lament the fall of man. That's the whole basis of 90% of the world's religions, to lament the fall of man, rather than to celebrate man's ability to get up and start all over again. Which, by the way, is the last line of that song.
Which song is that?
Pick your stuff up, brush yourself off, and start all over again.
Oh, I think I've heard that song. I can't remember what it is, but yeah. So, on the topic of practical steps, and the 4 questions were beautiful. Who am I? What am I? Why am I here? Are there any other practical steps for those who really feel like they went to a traditional school where you put things on the chalkboard, the number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4? For those type of listeners, which is probably most of us, anything else you want to add to the practical steps?
Practical steps to what? To win at poker?
To win at poker, yeah, exactly.
You have to know when to hold them, know when to fold them,
know when to walk away, know when to run.
know when to run. And you never count your money when you're sitting at the table. There'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done.
There's a lot of philosophy in that song.
So practical steps to what? To what?
Yeah, to being able to be an unconditional love instead of judgment, which seems to be one of the qualities of God.
I think the first practical step is to see if you can find any element of yourself, as I said a minute ago, in what you're seeing and experiencing across the room.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do see an element of yourself in what you're experiencing across the room, then ask yourself, how is it possible that I could have been behaving or speaking in this particular way, which I now find not acceptable when it's coming from another? Oh, I see. When I do it, it's totally correct, it's totally appropriate, and totally right. It's only when another person speaks that way that it's not okay. Interesting story I want to share with you. When my wife and I were heading off on our honeymoon, we were engaged to be married, and we were flying off on our honeymoon. We were going to go to Las Vegas and have a Las Vegas wedding, and then have some fun in gambling town. So, but I got to the airport, and they didn't have my tickets correct. And the guy was saying, "Oh, Mr. Walsh, we don't seem to have a reservation in, are you sure you're on this airplane? I can't see your reservation here." And I made a big deal about it, because of course I wanted to get on the plane and get on with my honeymoon with my soon-to-be wife. So I let the guy have a piece of my mind. I said, I'm a frequent flyer on this airplane. I fly thousands of miles every year. What's the matter with you? You can't find, and I gave him a piece of my mind. My wife later on told me, my then fiance, after we were married several weeks, she said, "You know what I discovered? I discovered there's a part of you that I call airport guy. I never want to run into airport guy, because I remember watching you at the front desk with that guy at the counter thinking, is this the man I'm about to marry? Does he fly off the handle like this with, whenever something occurs that doesn't match up with his idea of how things ought to be?" Oh my Lord, she said, and I had to just talk myself out of marrying you. I had to talk myself out of talking myself out of marrying you, because I realized, I'm just going to think this was just a happenstance. But it turns out, guess what? There's a part of you that I call airport guy. And we've been together now 17 years. God bless her. She's been with me 17 years, and there have been a few times in those 17 years where airport guy shows up again. And she'll just look at me across the kitchen and just smile and say, "Hello, airport guy." So I've learned as a practical matter to anticipate when airport guy is going to show up and to decide ahead of time how I want to respond when events occur in a way that I think is not appropriate or not the way it should be. You know, I said to God, I don't understand why life doesn't show up the way it should be. And God said to me, Neale, don't should on yourself.
Mhm.
Don't give yourself shoulds. Eliminate expectations from your whole life.
Yeah, the Buddha was really good at pointing out that our attachments cause us pain. You were
Okay.
attached to getting to Las Vegas to that,
Yeah,
ceremony.
I promise you, I certainly was. And what I've learned again from my conversation with God is that pain and suffering are not the same thing.
No,
Ask
not.
a woman in childbirth. She might experience pain, but she may be crying with tears of joy.
Hmm.
So
Exactly. I think of suffering as being resistance to pain.
yeah, suffering is an announcement that we think that what's occurring should not be occurring.
Right.
But when we agree with the fact that it's occurring, suffering goes away, even though the pain may not go away.
Exactly.
It's my understanding, and that's what I was told in my conversation with God.
Me too. That one I think we're both pretty clear on, and we see suffering and pain in the world, and pain is part of life on earth. Childbearing starts at the beginning.
Yeah.
But when we
So
fight it and resist it, then we get into trouble.
another point that I would bring up here, since you asked me, do I have any suggestions for people would be wakefulness. Stay awake. Because I think that life speaks to life, about life, through the process of life itself, which is another way of simply saying God is talking to us all the time. But if we're not careful, he'll go in one ear and out the other. So we've got to stay awake and make sure that we don't miss the communications from the divine. Because
Yeah.
God is talking, in my experience, God speaks to us in 100 different ways across 1,000 moments in 1,000,000 lifetimes. The chance utterance of a friend you just happen to run into on the street, somebody you haven't seen in 3 or 4 years comes around the corner and you, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't seen you in so long. And he happens to say something to you that triggers what you've been thinking about for weeks out of the blue. Or you're in a coffee shop having a little cup of coffee and a donut, and a couple at the next table is having a little spirited discussion about their relationship. And you realize they're talking to each other about the exact same thing you're looking at in your relationship. And you can't believe the synchronicity of it. Are you kidding me?
Mhm.
They're discussing this thing and having a really fruitful discussion about it that is serving your own personal agenda and
Mhm.
many, many other ways as well. The 12 words on a billboard. You're driving down the highway and you turn around a corner on the highway, and as you make that curve, you see a huge billboard with 12 words a mile high on the billboard, a message that directs its attention specifically to what you've been concerned about, even
Mhm.
as the lyrics of the song you hear on the radio speak to you directly. So the point being, stay awake, wakefulness. Don't let life pass you by. Pay attention to what's going on. It might even be a video program run by a guy named Sal that you happen to be watching right now
Mhm.
that is bringing you another message from the divine. Oh, no, that wouldn't happen. Sal Rakelli
No,
would.
that couldn't possibly happen.
No, not with a guy like Sal Rakelli. No way in the world.
Yeah, yeah, beautifully said. I want to say one thing about self-love, because a lot of what we're talking about, maybe it's easy for some people, but I think there's a lot of people out there that have trouble staying awake. They get distracted by the media, by the family, by the church, by the business, or whatever it is that distracts them. And the thing is to be gentle with yourselves, to appreciate the magnificent being that you are, and don't let falling asleep become a sin. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get back on the path, and don't lament the fact that you fell. So,
Or, I can lament the fact that I fell. I'm not going to celebrate the fact that I fell. I can lament the fact that I fell, but I don't have to stay in that posture. I can lament that I fell and then pick myself up, because that's not where I want to be,
and
then move forward. So I'm not sure in my own
well, that's conscience.
in my own point of view, I'm not sure that there's anything wrong about, or not okay about, or less enlightened about lamenting that I fell. In fact, I do lament. I regret, brother Sal, do I regret the mistakes I made from my 20th birthday till my 50th birthday? My 20s, 30s, and 40s were full of things that I lament now, and that I regret. But guilt and regret are not the same thing. So I don't feel guilty, but I do regret that, I made some of the decisions that I made, and I've chosen in the last 30 years of my life to never make those decisions again. The result of which is I don't fall nearly as often. I still fall down once in a while, but not nearly as often as I did in my 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Yeah, I guess I think of it as the hindsight principle. If I had it to do over, yes, of course, I'd do some things differently than the way I did them originally. But at the same time, I realize that it's just part of the journey.
There's no
there are
question.
boulders in the path sometimes,
There's no question about that. But that does not, the fact that it's part of the journey does not stop me from lamenting the choices that I made. And I really am, you know what, Sal, I'm really glad that I lament those choices, because if I didn't lament them, then I would not be prohibited from repeating them.
Okay.
So I like lamenting.
I guess it depends on the degree of lamentation. If it cripples you with regret and you're living in the path, then it's gone too far. But if it's simply, well, I learned my lesson from that poor decision I made, and I don't want to do that again, then I think it's beneficial. So maybe there's degrees of lamenting.
Oh, God, he used the word lamentation. Is there even such a word as lamentation? Oh, it's not a word in the English. Oh, there is. Oh, well, I've never heard that word before. Oh, okay, I got it. Thank you, God. Bye.
Somewhere in the Bible.
Well, yeah, she said Sal is smarter than you.
Oh no! Oh no!
He uses words you never heard of.
Oh, I like your sense of humor. Oh, so let's see. I think we put a 1 hour time on this, I think. So we have about 15 or 20 minutes remaining. So my goal is to give the very best possible service to our listeners as we possibly can. And I'm sure that's your goal as well. So I'm wondering what would be the most important thing you could say for our listeners in addition to what we've already talked about.
Well, I was asked on the Today Show. The Today Show is a national television program broadcast here in America. And they had me on the program a few years ago, and Matt Lauer, the host, one of the people on the team, was interviewing me, and he said, "Mr. Walsh, you claim to have spoken directly to God. What does God want people to know? Tell me, we have about 30 seconds left. So can you put it into one paragraph?" And I thought to myself, you stinker. You would ask me the biggest question of all time when you know you have only 30 seconds left in the interview.
That's
Nice
network
going, Matt.
television.
Yeah. But then it came to me very clearly. I said, Matt, I don't need 30 seconds. I don't even need one paragraph. I can tell you in 5 words what God wants the world to hear. And Matt Lauer said, okay, looks at the camera, ladies and gentlemen, from Neale Donald Walsh, God's message to the world. Neale? And I looked at the camera and I gave them God's message to the world in 5 words. You've got me all wrong. Sal, Matt didn't know where to go with that. He realized if it's true, you've got me all wrong, then the discussion has just begun and he doesn't have any time left. If it's not true, you've got me all wrong, then the discussion is over. There's nothing more to say. So he was totally out of words. He just said, all right, ladies and gentlemen, now we'll be back after these words from our sponsor. And he cut to a commercial even before he had to, because he had nothing else to say after that. But I really thought about that when I left the TV studio. What if that was God's biggest message to the world? You've got me all wrong. So I pondered that. And I wound up producing a book titled God's Message to the World. And in the book, it is stated that what we have wrong about God is that we think that God is loving, for sure, but also judging, condemning, and punishing. And because we think that God is judging, condemning, and punishing when we don't do what God wants us to do, or needs us to do, or requires us to do, when we are not obeying God's commands, then God will judge, condemn, and punish us. And because we believe that that's how God behaves with us, that's how we behave with other people. Because, what's good enough for God is good enough for us. So if other people or other nations, if you please, do not do what we judge to be required and what we demand of them, then we will judge, condemn, and punish them. In other words, our behaviors are based on how we think that God behaves with us. But what if we've got God all wrong? What if God never judges, condemns, or punishes anyone? What if God simply, in fact, loves us purely? What if God is simply defined in 2 words, pure love, which would never judge or condemn or punish anyone for anything? Now, if that happens to be what's true about God, then we do have, that is, millions of people have got all wrong. We've got it all wrong. And now we have to change the basis of our own behaviors. I call this the God solution. It's the solution to the God dilemma. And by the way, I've also written a book called The God Solution. People are going to wonder, but I've written 41 books. All of them have been published. Of the 41 published books that I have produced, The God Solution is one that I offer people at no cost. If any of those people watching this program right now want a copy, they can just send me an email and I'll send them a digital copy by return email of the book, The God Solution, at no cost, because I want everyone to read The God Solution, which is to treat everyone from a place of pure love. That's how God treats us. But you know what? Somebody in the back of the room will always say to me when I say this at a lecture, somebody will get up in the back of the room, oh, Mr. Wolf, come on. We've sat here for 25 minutes for you to tell us the big revelation is that God is love. Everyone knows that God is love. Even religions that differ on dogma and doctrine agree that God is love. And I have to say to them, wait, that's not what I said. Oh, okay, what did you say? I said that God is pure love.
Uh-huh.
Ah, what's the difference? Says the man in the back of the room. To which I reply, the difference is that pure love needs, expects, requires, wants, and demands nothing in return. We can't even love the person on the pillow next to us in that way. Much less can we imagine a God who loves us that way. But when we can find a way to love others without needing, expecting, requiring, or demanding anything in return, then we have suddenly understood the God solution. And that would be the solution to all of humanity's problems overnight.
Beautiful. Thank you
I
for
could,
that.
of course, be wrong about that. But if anybody would like to read a free copy of the digital version of the God solution, just send me a note. You couldn't forget my email address if you tried. Neale@neale.walsch.com. Quite simple.
Pretty simple. That's beautiful. And I just have one comment that I think I can piggyback on that, and that is that I once thought of God's love as a radio station broadcasting on megawatts continuously 24 hours a day. And what's the one requirement of us? We have to tune to that station. But we're so busy tuned to the fear channel or the guilt channel or the whatever channel, judgment channel, that most of us haven't, the old-fashioned radio dial where you tune it like this. Oh, there it is, the love channel, the pure love channel. Ah, it's been there all along, just like there's a classical music station broadcasting right now, whether we can hear it or not. We probably can't hear it because we're not tuned to it. Ah, so I just wanted to add that because I think it parallels with what you're saying.
Now, you wouldn't imagine the irony of the illustration, the metaphor that you just used. Do you know that I spent 25 years in the broadcasting business?
Okay.
I mean, I was on the radio as an on-air personality for 25 years. So I really relate to that particular metaphor. And I love it. I think you're totally right. You got to tune in for sure.
Wow. So I think we've been talking almost an hour. I look at my recorder. I think we're 50 some minutes. And there's more to say and no more to say, depending on how you look at it. So I'm very grateful you took this time to speak with me. And like I said,
Thank you, Sal, for the invitation and the opportunity to do so.
And I guess my closing remarks would be maybe a little simple, which is, don't fall asleep again. Stay awake. And it doesn't seem to be that easy to stay awake in this world because this world is full of distractions, things that want to get us believing, oh, I need that in order to be happy. I need this in order to be happy.
The irony of what you just said. The irony of what you've just said is that when I'm trying to sleep, it's distractions that keep me awake.
That's a good one.
So you just said we can't stay awake because of all the distractions, and my mind went, wait a minute, that's exactly how I stay awake. because of all the distractions.
It's funny, yeah. It's a funny metaphor.
So, but I really taking the humor out of it in an interesting, ironic way, the distractions of life is what causes me to wake up to what must really be going on, because all the distractions do ultimately is convince me, wait a minute, this can't be the way it really is. This can't be the way it was meant to be. There's something here that I don't understand, the understanding of which would change everything.
Mhm.
And so when I'm bombarded with all the distractions coming at me from social media and television and radio and newspapers and all the other ways that those distractions assail me, when I feel those distractions coming over me, I think, okay, there's more going on here than meets the eye.
Mhm.
Ah, Shakespeare had it right. Bill was correct. He actually wrote it in the dialogue of his play, Hamlet. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Mm.
Or to put it another way, to be or not to be. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to rise up against a sea of troubles, and by opposing to end them, to die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that
Mm.
sleep of death, what dreams may come.
Mhm. Well, I want to thank you for your presence, because presence is everything.
Well,
And
thank you. I don't really think that I gave any gifts, but I did offer many presents to other people. So thank you for my presence is a nice thing for you to do. Oh, no, he didn't mean presents that way. He meant presents this way. Okay, okay. But you're welcome for all the presents. And thank you. You're being very generous. And I appreciate the time we've had a chance to spend together.
many blessings and namaste.
Thank
And
you,
we
my friend.
will connect again in the perfect, right, appropriate time and place.
Perfect. Thank you, Sal. Blessed be.
Blessed be to you.